Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the American Book Review for asking me to come here in the University of Houston, Victoria. It's a great city. We didn't have any books around the house. I went to Catholic schools, as Tom suggested, and read and began to read, and actually did begin to like books, but it wasn't what I was reading in school necessarily, because there were all stories about kids that owned horses, and robins nested in the tree out front, and the cops were nice, and all that sort of thing. And I really didn't. I couldn't find myself in it. Not that they were bad stories, but actually, when people ask me what did I read that made me want to become a writer, there was a series of those Tom Swift books, the series like that. There was one that was all about sports. It was called the Chip Hilton series, and it was written by Claire B., who had been the LIU basketball coach anyway. And I read all of those books, and it was the first time that I was carried away, and I thought, wow, this reading is what I enjoyed. And so I became a writer probably because I was a reader first. And I got into elementary school anyway, and I realized at some point that I had a certain facility with writing, and Sister would say, John, that's a nice composition you wrote. And I'd say, all right, I'll write you another one. And I'll make it just like the last one, because I knew that writing was a way to get attention and a way to get love, and a sad way to do it, I guess. But that's what I started doing, and so I realized that was a skill I had. But what I didn't know how to do, of course, at this point was how to tell a story. And what you learn in life is that writing is one thing and telling a story is another. Where I learned to love stories was in my grandmother's kitchen. Every Sunday afternoon, my grandfather was one of 19 children. We had kind of a big family. And many of us met every week at least my grandmother's children, and so my aunts and uncles and cousins, we met at my grandmother's flat and had the same meal every week. And then the men, after the meal, the men went in the living room to watch the Red Sox lose to the Yankees. And the women stayed in the kitchen, smoked cigarettes, drank coffee, and gossiped about the neighborhood. And I stayed in the kitchen because that's where the action was. And they were telling stories. It was all about trouble and about people that I knew and people I'd seen at Mass that morning, and people, the names of the DeRoches and the Favereaux and the Barrasses and all this. We lived on French Hill. So it was like listening to that, and that's really what it turns out in the long run, that what writing stories is stories are gossip about people that you made up. So I learned that telling a story and how to structure a story and how to make people laugh and I didn't even know what they were talking about most of the time. Whenever they said pregnant, they said PG. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew somebody around here was in trouble, and I knew, and somebody owed money to somebody and all that sort of thing. So I was interested in stories, and then I went to a Catholic high school where I had brothers, actually. I went from nuns to brothers. And anyway, I was not a good student, and in high school, I can still say the worst 4 years of my life, I'm sad to say. But it changed my life because I got a couple of teachers in there, one of whom said, you really know how to write a composition. What I had done, actually, was I had just discovered J.D. Salinger, and I had just discovered Harper Lee within like a week of each other, and I went to the library and I read those books, and I said, wow, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. I want somebody to transport. I want to do to somebody else what those books did to me, which was take me out of my world and drop me in a world that was much more interesting and intriguing and compelling. And I remember reading those books, the experience of lying on my bed reading those books, and my mother saying it's time for supper, and I said, well, later. I'm not leaving the book. And so, never wanting the books to end. So that's when I decided I want to tell stories. So I can use the writing to get me to that place, I hope. And I did the same thing. And when he's told me I wrote a good composition, what I had done was taken Holden Caulfield's voice and made it my own for a composition. And he said, oh, you really can write. And so I wrote the next composition exactly the same way. I used the word phony as often as I could. And then after about the third one, he said, okay, you can write in jeans. Can you write in a top hat and tails? Which in some ways may be the best writing advice I ever got. Can you do something other than this? I'm getting bored. But anyway, it was enough. Somebody thought that I was good. And, there were no writers in my neighborhood or no writers that I knew. I didn't know how to do this. But anyway, I was encouraged enough. And I had other teachers who were telling me what to read and would, pull me out of class so we could talk about books, and it was great. It was a wonderful experience. And anyway, go on. I become an English major, and then I get a job as. This was the '60s and '70s, and we were a lot of political involvement at the time in the Vietnam War and all that sort of thing. And I wanted to save the world. I think we all did at that time. And I thought the best way to do it would be one person at a time. So be a social worker and you can deal with all of this. And so, well, that didn't work out. I mean, and I loved the work, but I still was trying to write stories, right? Trying to write, and I was writing a lot of stories, but not knowing if I was getting any better, and so on. So I eventually, after 7 years of being a social worker, I applied. I said, if I'm going to get any better at this, I better talk to somebody who knows. Because your friends would say, "Oh, that's great. You're really sweet. You're really smart. Let's go get a beer." And that was it. They didn't care if you were good or wrote the story or anything. I was just a curiosity, really. So I applied for college. I said, anyway, there's other things going on at the same time. I lost my job. I lost my marriage. And it was all well-timed, so time to get out of town. I can leave town now. And I went to Arkansas, as I said, and I turned up the first day of class in Fayetteville. My story was on Workshop, the story that I had used to get into the program. And I met this guy, Matt Harris, who had been James Jones's editor. And he was in the class, and he said to me, "I can't wait till tonight." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, Bill Harrison, hates experimental stories." I said, "Oh, it's mine." Well, so I went trembling into the workshop. And anyway, at the end of the class, after it was over, I said, "Well," I said, "What do I do?" And he said, you write like an angel, but you have no idea what a story is." So I said, "Tell me what a story is." And he told me what a plot was. And that's all I needed. And I said, "Oh, okay, this is why I came here." And I said, "Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do. And that's what I'm going to spend the next, I'll do anything you tell me to do so I can learn how to write a story." And it was like imitating Salinger, imitating the next, I moved on to Hemingway. Or probably I moved on to Faulkner, and then I cleansed my palate with Hemingway, and then I moved on to Celine and all that. And so I was just trying to learn by imitation, and it is how I learned. And anyway, and so I've been writing furiously. And Tom mentioned Steve Yarbrough. He was in my class at the time, and Lee Martin was in my class, who was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. They were all in this class together. And one day we had a visiting writer, Tom Whalen, who from New Orleans. He was editing the New Orleans Review at the time, I think, and he walked in, 17 people around the desk, and he said, "Only 3 of you will be writing in 5 years." And I said, well, I looked around and said, "Well, who are the other 2? And I didn't know I would be published, I will say that. I wasn't that confident, but I knew I would be writing. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop myself from doing it. And I really didn't know if I was good at that point. But people like Steve Yarbrough and Skip Hayes, who was a student there then, who now runs the program at Arkansas and all that. These are the people, I learned as much from them as I did from my instructors. All we ever did was talk about books and talk about writing. We did nothing else for the whole time we were there. And they told me what I needed to read, and because I didn't start till late. Again, I wasn't a reader as a kid, other than those sports books. Anyway, so then I go off into the world, and I'm still trying to learn how to write. And I have this friend in Augusta, Georgia, when I lived there, named Charlie Willig. And Charlie was the best storyteller I have ever met in my life. He had a story about every citizen in Augusta, Georgia. And he grew up in Oklahoma and working as a welder, and he had stories about everyone that he worked with in Oklahoma, everyone at that time. He just told stories all the time. And I said, "Charlie, you got to write these down, and you got to, these are fabulous stories." The stories just came to him. They just came to him, and he just shaped them. He would tell the stories, and he'd say, "Yeah, I'll write it down," but he never did. He never wrote them down. So I used to say, "Charlie, come over to my house in the morning, tell me your story, and then go, and then I'll write it, and that'll be my way to get material." And I couldn't figure out how he had so many stories. And what I realized around that time was that stories happen to people who tell the stories. So if you're telling stories all the time, you're finding them around you. And so and Charlie didn't need to write them. He wanted the immediate response. He wanted somebody to look at him and smile. He wanted somebody to, so I had a different need. I wanted to get it, to get the response later. That's when you're a writer, no one's at your house clapping when you get a good sentence or you find the right word or anything like that. You never know. and somebody's reading it in a room somewhere 1,000 miles from you. You don't know what effect it's having on that person. So you come to do readings at universities and get a response that way later on. But and so Charlie sort of, again, just listening to how he told stories was another way that I learned to tell. So a lot of, the first stories I ever heard, to go way back to the beginning, were my father reading me fairy tales before I went to bed. So it was almost always about hearing stories more than about writing stories. And so that's what got me into it. But I'm a better writer than I am a stand-up comedian or whatever, like somebody who can just tell the story, or a public speaker, I guess. I may be skipping some part of the story, I'm sure I am, but that's sort of it. So I came from a place without books, home without books, and drifted into the one thing I know how to do in school was to write a little bit, and so using that and trying to, and then just falling in love with stories. More than about writing itself. It's the telling of the story that is important to me as a writer. Anyway, we'll have time to ask questions after this, and if you want to know anything else about my becoming a writer, I will be happy to answer them. I'm going to read a short story. People say, where do stories come from? And so you should know this anyway. They come from out there, right? I tell my students, go to Home Depot. They're everywhere. Go to Walmart at 2 in the morning. You want a story. Walk around. They're out there. They're not in your head. They're out there in the world. And the first act of writing is noticing, and your job is to go out there and find the stories and steal their precious little lives and give it a shape, which is what fiction is about, shaping something. So this story actually happened. And when a writer leaves the writing desk, like when a writer goes anywhere, the writer is looking for material. So you're all on alert. Anything you say may turn up in a story somewhere. And this actually happened. I was doing a reading in Indiana, and students took me out for lunch, and when one student joined us a little bit late, she sat beside me, and we were chatting a little bit, and she told, this was a Tuesday, I think it was, or a Wednesday, Tuesday, and she said, I'm getting married Friday. I said, fabulous, that's great. Who's the lucky man? She said, I met him yesterday. So I said, give this girl a drink on me, and I took out my pen, and I didn't actually do that. I wasn't that crude. But I did keep asking her all the important questions. And so this is the story that resulted from it. And it's called Epithalamion, which is kind of a traditional poem in praise of marriage. So this is what it is. And, of course, the names are changed to protect the innocent. Brandy's getting married on Friday at 2:30 at Centerville City Hall to a Bulgarian gentleman with whom she spoke for the first time on Monday night over the phone. She met Radomil, call me Rado, all my friends do, on Tuesday morning at the Tick-Tock Diner. She arrived before he did. The sign on the diner's screen door said, no outside food. Rado's name means happy favor. He's been searching for a wife in America and was beginning to lose hope. His visa expires Thursday week. Without a green card, it's back to Plovdiv. Rado has a gold loop pierced through his left eyebrow, a gold stud in each ear, and a tattoo of a serpent on his right bicep. Brandy ordered biscuits and gravy, Rado eggs and hash, coffee for both. At the counter, a fat man in a yellow Purdue University T-shirt and baggy blue pants ordered sweet potato pancakes. The man wore a cloth hat with the leather lace tied under his chin, and he decided to fold the brim up on the right and down on the left. Rado squirted mustard on his sunny-side eggs. He ate his toast with a knife and fork. Brandy sipped her coffee and watched him chew and chew. She wondered if Rado was circumcised. Mr. Perdue asked for a doggy bag. Rado, it seems, was a tireless masticator. His lips glistened with yolk. Brandy knows that she has a twin in a spiral galaxy 10 to the 28th meters from Centerville. She's read all about it for astronomy class. In infinite space, even the most unlikely events must take place somewhere. There's an exact copy of her who is not her, but who also lives on a blue planet called Earth in a solar system with 8 other planets. The life of Brandy's double has been identical to Brandy's in every respect until now. Now, the doppelganger, Brandy, and her parallel universe puts down her fork, wipes her face with a napkin, says to her Rado, "Thanks, but no thanks," and walks out of the diner. The sign on the diner's screen door is worn and faded and says, "No outs." For her not inconsiderable troubles, Brandy will earn $2,000, money she could use toward her tuition. She's an English major at a local branch of the state university. She'll get the first $500 on Friday. Well, more likely $300, because this morning, Wednesday, she made Rado buy her a $200 diamond solitaire ring at Zales. "We're going to do this right," she told him. She'll get the next 1,000 at the 3-month meeting with the INS. We're trying so hard to have a baby, aren't we, sweetie? She'll get the remaining 500 on their second wedding anniversary, when the divorce proceedings will get underway. On Thursday, Rado will move in with Brandy for 1 week. Right now, Rado rents a shabby third-floor studio apartment over by the Defiance County Farmers Museum. The walls of his crib, as he calls it, are decorated, well, that's not quite the appropriate word, are embellished with magazine photos of lavishly bosomed women in scanty swimsuits. After the week, Rado will move in with some pals from work. Brandy thanked the waitress for the refill. She told Rado, "You can understand, can't you, how this is a significant disappointment. You'll be helping me out, Brandy. A wedding is supposed to be one of the highlights of a woman's life. You're helping yourself out. It's not supposed to be a good deed, a casual business proposition. It's not the wedding that matters, Brandy. It's the marriage. And what kind of marriage will this be? One without deception, better than most. Marriage should be the start of a new life. We have a saying in my country, marriage teaches you how to live alone." In her intro to lit class, Brandy couldn't keep her attention on Professor Rivard's lecture about Henry James Joyce Kilmer, or whoever he was. She'd get the notes from Gretchen the Brainiac after class. Brandy wrote her new name on the cover of her literature notebook, Brandy Kostoff. Brandy Blythe Kostoff. Mrs. Brandy Blythe Kostoff. Mrs. Radomil Kostoff. She liked the music of it. When Brandy got the notes from Gretchen, she asked Gretchen if she would be her witness at the wedding Friday. "Yes, this Friday. Yes, I'm serious. And could you bring a camera?" Brandy lives practically alone in her stepfather's house. Her real father, Bob Forbes, is an independent agent in town who can't catch word of the upcoming nuptials, or he'll try to stop them. Bob Forbes is connected. The stepdad, Sonny O'Laughlin, spends most of his time over at his girlfriend Rosemary's house, or else the pair of them are parked at the bar at the Rendezvous. But every afternoon, Sonny comes by the house to take a shower. Sonny told Brandy he wasn't so sure that marrying the Bulgarian was such a brilliant idea. Of course, Sonny once married Brandy's mom, Georgette, who is certifiable and who goes through men like candy, so he's not exactly the best judge of suitable marriage material. "Granted, I've made my mistakes," he said, "but what do we really know about Bulgaria, Brandy?" There are 4 beds in Sonny's house, Brandy's queen, Sonny's waterbed, and the bunk beds in the guest room. The bunk beds in the room once belonged to Brandy's brothers Roy and Ray before they got involved with crank and motorcycles, before they drifted away to God knows where. Rado sleeps days. He works the graveyard shift at the Walmart out on Old New Concord Road. He cleans floors. The work is subcontracted, so Rado is not actually part of the Walmart family. He's part of the Flawless Floor Care family. He makes more money cleaning floors in Centerville than he could make at any job in Plovdiv or Sofia. He owns an Ericsson cell phone, Dolce & Gabbana sunglasses, a Rolex watch, and a Hugo Boss suit. He wears Air Jordans and Prada shoes. He smokes Marlboros, drinks Remy Martin. He dreams of opening his own beauty salon, Radomil Chic. In Bulgaria, he designed accounting and business management software. He speaks 3 languages. Brandy thinks Rado is hot. He has thick, dark, shoulder-length hair that shimmers, that shimmers with highlights in the sun. Brandy adores blue eyes, but she'll settle for brown eyes in her first husband. That's how hot Rado is. When they went shopping for the wedding ring, Rado wore a yellow tank top, snug black slacks, and a black leather jacket. Brandy wore a hair down and also wore a black leather jacket. As they came out of Zales, they each turned into the wind. Let the spring breeze luff the hair from their faces, and they each put on their sunglasses like they were synchronized dancers, like they were moving in slow motion. Fred and Ginger. Kismet. Ratto called Brandy on Wednesday afternoon while he was jogging in Miller's Glen Park. "We have a little problem," he said. Brandy's friend Kelly's mother was demanding at least a share of the $500 finder's fee. Ratto explained that his friend Klaus, not Kelly's mother, had introduced him to Brandy. Brandy called Kelly's mom, who told her that she had given Brandy's phone number to Klaus and was only asking for her just reward. Brandy asked Mrs. Druin to please try to understand. "This is my future we're talking about. Your quarrel is with Klaus." Mrs. Druin didn't like this one bit, but she did back off her demand. And yes, she would speak with that son of a bitch Klaus. And no, she would not contact the INS. Brandy hopes to consummate the marriage. She also hopes that Ratto won't hurt her. When they filed for the marriage license, Brandy asked the clerk what the $10 domestic violence fee was all about, and was told that it's sort of a prepayment to help defray the cost of the police officers who might be called out to intervene should domestic affairs turn nasty and brutish, as they so often do. Ratto explained to Brandy how their marriage, unfortunately, makes consummation impractical, or rather the eventual inevitable divorce does. But after the divorce, when they're both single again, what's to stop them from dating, from falling in love, from raising a family, from living happily ever after? On Tuesday night, Brandy dreamed about Texaco. Texaco was a former boyfriend, if you can count one disagreeable date as a boyfriend, who had subsequently stalked her for 6 months. He called her 312 times in a single day. He tossed stones at her window. He mailed her dozens of lurid postcards, sent her photographs of his uncircumcised penis. He followed her home from work. He stood outside restaurants while she ate. In the dream, Texaco was played by the actor who played the priest killer in the movie she saw on the cable the other night. Texaco is wearing the left brim of his hat down so that you can't see his eye, and he's telling her that she had better do just as she's told when Brandy notices the brow. Now that she knows his secret Bulgarian identity, Texaco will have to kill her. But before he gets the chance to, Ryan comes to the rescue. Ryan has blue eyes. He's Brandy's boss, the night manager at You Want a Pizza Me. Brandy has had a mad crush on Ryan ever since she met. Ryan seems not to have noticed. Ryan is not what most girls would think of as handsome, but he is a dreamboat in Brandy's eyes. She calls him sweet ass when he's not around. Ryan lives 20 minutes out of town in New Concord. He lives alone now that his undeserving wife has left him. On Sunday night, Brandy told Ryan, whose name means young royalty, that he should just stay at her house instead of driving home so late in the pouring rain and the fog. He didn't stay, didn't say thanks, but no thanks, didn't compliment her generosity, didn't offer an excuse, didn't feel the need to. Ryan's divorce becomes official on Friday. Is that a sign or what? All the while at work, this 18-year-old tramp, Elise the Peace, Brandy calls her, has had her mitts all over poor Ryan. Elise knows how Brandy feels about Ryan, but she's always pawing at the poor guy regardless, kneading his shoulders, touching his arm. When Brandy called Elise a whore right to her freckled face, Elise slapped her across the cheek. Brandy called Ryan at work on Wednesday evening just to talk. "I've got a rush here, Brandy. Call me later." Brandy went to the party for the visiting writer at Professor Bell's house. The beer and bourbon were flowing, and then Phil, the senior theater major, took out his guitar. And when everyone got to singing, Brandy took her turn and led them in Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. She was weeping herself by the end of the song, and so was Professor Phil. Brandy stopped in to see Ryan on her way home. She helped him fold delivery boxes. She told him she was getting married on Friday and would be into work after the ceremony. Well, it's not really ceremonious, is it? After the performance, the to-do, after the fuss, and after a quick bite at Sabrina's toast of the town. Ryan said, "You what?" And Brandy's heart leaped. "I'm getting married." Ryan's jaw dropped. It was as if his face were set in cement. Brandy had hoped, that when she told Ryan about the wedding, he would at long last profess his love for her. And if he did, she would call off the wedding with Rado. But he did not. No, Ryan said, he could not envision anything going on between them outside of "You want a pizza" me. Brandy said, "Of course I'll deliver pizzas on Friday, Ryan. Nothing's changed." Brandy has been wondering how things will turn out for her other self on the distant planet Earth, the self who walked away from Rado. But she knows she'll never find out. Even if she traveled forever at the speed of light, Brandy could not reach Brandy, because the space between them is expanding faster than the speed of light. It seems unfair to have to remain a mystery to yourself. Better not to know that you also live in another galaxy than to know but be unable to talk to yourself. And yet the knowledge is strangely comforting as well, knowing that all of this, the pizza job, the empty beds, the graveyard shifts, the visiting riders, the reluctant darling, the Bulgarian suitor, that this is not all there is. Thank you. Thank you. Or just Peter? Huh? So just question you? Yeah. Thank you. I have a follow-up to that story because, I have the wedding pictures that the Brainiac did bring her camera and did take a photograph. And at the town, they were married at the town clerk's, and or the county clerk, whatever it was anyway. And there's a picture of she and Rado's reaching into, at the time, she told me, I don't see this in the picture. He's got the ring in the picture, but he was reaching in to get the ring out of his pocket, and a condom fell out of his pocket. So he may have changed his mind about consummation at that point anyway. And then eventually he left her, not only several months later. See, I'm getting ready to write the sequel to this. And he left her, and she called the INS and had him picked up in Michigan with his Bulgarian friends. And she had Ryan's baby. And Ryan refused to support her or the baby. That's the story as it stands now, anyway. So I'm waiting for more things. Next report on this. So we have time for question and answers if anybody has any questions. Or answers. Or suggestions. Yes?
I just finished reading Deep in the Shade of Paradise.
Okay.
A great read.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
One thing that struck me, page 3 in your copy, you write, for him, the book exists in the writing. After that, it's merchandise. Hearing you talk about the way you go about developing your story, obviously you spend a great deal of time doing that. I find that hard to believe that you can just say, okay, and that this was talking about from the writer.
Yeah, this is a book that plays around with the writer intrudes and all that sort of thing in here. But, and that's true. What writers like to do is write, not to have written, but to actually be doing it, to be moving the pen across the page, and to be making characters up, and to be creating new worlds. That's what's fun. And then when it's done, you've got something else to write, and that moves on, and and it takes off. And by the time the book comes out, you can't remember who was in that book. That's not quite true, because those characters in that book, some of them, two of them, were in a previous book of mine called Louisiana, Power and Light. And it was about the last member of a clan, and actually at the end of the book, there's a child being born, and that's the child. And that's why I wrote that book. I wanted to know what the kid was doing. If he was just born then, I said, okay, he's about 12 now. Let me see what he'd be up to, and that's why I started writing that book. So some of the people stay with you, and they never leave your thoughts. You think about them, but it's not important anymore. It's like you did that story. It's over. And the only thing that happens when you read stories over again is like, why did I leave that line in there? God, I should have taken that out. Sometimes I just leave them out as I'm reading because you don't have the book. You don't know. And it's better. It's like, but so you write, and it's kind of frustrating because you realize, I could have made this better if I had one more day. But anyway, so it really is the writing that's more fun, and it's making up the people and getting to know them and spending time with them. But it takes 4 years for me to write that novel and many novels, and so I know them pretty well, I think, by the end of it. And I've had it for a while. I don't need, maybe I'll write about him when he's 30 or something later on. Voodoo. Yes.
You have some very interesting titles.
Most often enduring. Louisiana Power and Light was my first novel, and I wrote it to teach myself how to write a novel because I had only written short stories. And here's some, for those of you who want to be writers, publishers don't want you to write stories. My editor has said, don't even bother anymore. Just do it. But you keep doing it. But they want novels. The New York publishers, anyway, they want novels because they sell better, I guess. I mean, I'm sure they do. They wouldn't lie to me. So anyway, when I had my first book come out, which was stories, my editor called me up and she said, you got a novel? And I said, no, I got more stories. She said, you have a novel? Yes, I think I do in my drawer. Let me pull it out, work on it. So I had to start writing really fast. And it took me 4 years, but I had to learn how to do this, to go the distance. So anyway, that was called Louisiana Power and Light. And I was about 150 pages or 200 pages into the novel, and I realized, I said, I don't know what the hell this guy does for work. He was going to be a priest. He was groomed for the priesthood, as they say, and he met a woman, and so that was the end of the priesthood now. And he's living with her and all, and I said, he's got to have a job. I mean, he's not like Ozzie Nelson. There's an illusion that two people got. Anyway, and so I said, oh, what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? My father worked for the power company, for Massachusetts Electric. And so I said, I'll have him work for the power company. So if I have any questions about the job, I'll call my father and say, Dad, if you touch this wire with this wire, what will happen? And something like that. And I realized I was living in Louisiana. I was living in Monroe, and the story was set there. And I said, oh, my God, the power company is called, before it was called Entergy. Thank God, I wrote it before that. It was called Louisiana Power and Light. And I said, Power and Light, oh, my God. This is amazing. And so I spent 2 weeks before I had a computer, researching the words power and light and all the applications and all the meanings of those words. And I had big files on and I said, I'm going to use every meaning of those words I can before this is over. Power and light. And part of one of the themes is sort of spiritual growth and awakening in the book. And so I thought, this is perfect. So that's how that came to me, out of my father's job. Love Warps the Mind a Little came from a poem by, I think it was George Herbert or somebody back in those days who had it. I found that line somewhere and I had saved it in my notebook and used it later on. And Requiem Mass, I was writing about Worcester, Mass, where I live. And it's Requiem, comma, Mass, period, right? And so when you come from there, no one says Massachusetts, you just say Mass. I live in Mass. I'm from Worcester, Mass. I'm from Lowell, Mass. And so I didn't want to make it Worcester because no one would read the book. So I thought, critical mass. No, that's good. I'll be critical mass. And then I thought, Requiem Mass. Oh, that's even better. And then that just was like thinking about the word mass. And so I don't know, I think titles are important, and I like to have fun with them, and I play. And sometimes the books have many titles before they have the final one. You just call it the something book for a while, this book. I got one now called, and this, some of you will know what this, I'm working on a book. I'm stuck on it, actually, page 180 stuck. And it's called, right now, the central character's name is Wiley, W-Y-L-I-E, Melville, where did I get that name? And Wiley Melvin, his friend calls him Coyote because of Wile E. Coyote, right? So the book is called No Regrets Coyote, which is lyrics from a Joni Mitchell song. So I don't know if I'll stick with that, but right now that's what it's called. But I kind of think I might change it at some point. Well, first I got to finish the damn thing. Good. Anyway, so any other questions? Yes.
Is there a copyright issue when you're taking words like that other people?
Words like Wile E. Coyote? Oh, no. Oh, the Joni Mitchell thing? No. No, it wouldn't be. You have to actually, we were talking about this briefly, you have to be very careful when you're dealing with lyrics, song lyrics these days. It's changed in the last 10 years or so. When I was with my first books, when you were writing, you could quote 2 lines. It's called fair use. And you could take 2 lines of a song, as long as it wasn't, a haiku. You could take 2 lines that didn't represent the majority of the poem, and you could use them. And then it was 1 line. So in one of my stories in this book, I was quoting Al Green, Take Me to the River, and they made me change it because it was 2 lines. So I just took another line from it. It was 1 line. And now they said, this is Norton is my publisher. I'm not sure if every publisher feels it. They said, you can't quote any. Because the music business has become so litigious because they're not making money anymore because we're all downloading things for free. Not me, but some people are. So they're kind of, the lawyers are kind of scary about this. So all my characters now, it's like they're just like the old gospel tunes. They're all doing it. As long as Thomas Dorsey didn't write it, I figure you're okay. And it's in the, and so you can, that's what happens. So I don't, in that case, that wouldn't be, I hope, that's a good point. Some lawyer would tell me before the end of it, though, but I don't think it would be an issue as a title. Yes?
Did Brandy get in trouble with INS?
No. He got picked up. I don't know what happened to him after he got picked up.
But I mean, she...
You know what? I found out when I came home. I know some people. I know people, as they say. But I had some friends, and there were these two women, partners, lesbian couple that lived in my neighborhood, and we were talking about this. They were over, and I told them, I was telling them this story before I wrote it, just thinking about the story. And one of them said, well, that's how I got through college. She said, only the going rate is $5,000. And I said, well, I'll have to call Brandy. She can get more out of this. She can get the whole thing paid for. And so that was it, yeah.
Any more money than the $300?
No. I'm screwing up this thing here. Put that there. No, she didn't, that I know of. No more money. But she's got a baby now. So.
Back to this book.
Yes.
There was, you might think there's an odd question, but
No.
I really want to know when Adeline left in the funeral home to say that his mom was just passed away, casket is open. She's about to leave. He's thinking about leaving something of sentimental value in the casket with her. And as he's turned to leave, he looks back. You have a cockroach crawl up from the pink satin, looks in the air, and crawl back under his shoulder.
Yeah.
What is all that about?
It's the real world. No, there's no place for sentimentality. So you think you're going to make something sweet out of this. This is death, and here's the cockroach moving in. I don't know, like that. I had been struck, well, you have them too, right? We have, cockroaches. We call them palmetto bugs. Do you call them that here? No, we don't call them cockroaches. We got all different kinds of varieties of them, but the big ones, that's what I was thinking of, the big guys. The American cockroaches, those ones that come in from outside. And I had a student of mine who was a nurse at Jackson Hospital in Miami before they built the new Jackson, and it's now a big teaching hospital, but it was a small hospital. She said she saw, I shouldn't even tell you this. Somebody had a tracheotomy and there was a cockroach involved. That's all I'm going to tell you. So I can't shake that. So that's sort of where that came from.
On that note,
Thank you.